His first mission over Germany should have killed him, but this 19-year-old pilot triggered an intel panic instead. In a sky full of fire and intercepted codes, he made one impossible move. A move so dangerous the truth was never meant to be found. Dawn over Bremen looked nothing like morning. It looked like a furnace opening, its jaws burning contrails, scattered flak, and the metallic stink of war drifting through the frozen air. Beneath that churning sky, Chuck Yeager, just 19 and still learning the weight of his oxygen mask, tightened his grip on the P-51 Mustang's control stick. His 8th mission, but the one history would remember as his first impossible escape. Radio static hissed like a warning snake. The bomber formation ahead was taking hits, orange blossoms of flame blooming across the horizon, and somewhere behind him, the enemy was closing in. Then the voice came through his headset. Clipped and urgent. 109 on your tail. Brake left now. Chuck didn't think. He moved. Tracer rounds carved white scars through the air where his cockpit had been moments earlier. The Bf-109 behind him, flown by veteran ace Ludwig Franciset, pressed in with the calm precision of a man who'd turned killing into muscle memory. Franciset had 11 confirmed kills. He had a trembling heartbeat and a fuel gauge that was already sinking to low. And this was the moment, the origin point for the tactic hidden in your title. This 19-year-old was flying his first mission and accidentally started a new combat tactic. He just didn't know it yet. Doctrine said one thing: stay in formation, stay predictable, never dive away from a Bf-109. Every flight instructor, every American tactical manual, every after-action report made it gospel. German fighters owned the dive. Their fuel-injected engines gave them an early advantage. Diving meant death, period. Chuck knew all that. And still, as the cockpit canopy rattled from another near, his instincts, those Appalachian instincts honed from years hunting squirrels through dense forest, whispered something else. Speed is survival. Terrain is survival. The unexpected is survival. He rolled inverted. And dove. The Mustang dropped like a stone, 450 miles per hour, Lima Ratos mph. The airframe shuddered so hard, he felt vibration through his ribs. Vision darkened at the edges. The stick stiffened, locked under pressure. Francis CET followed, and that's where everything changed. Instead of gaining, the German began to lose ground. The Bf-109's rounds fell short. The impossible was unfolding in real time. The Mustang should not have been accelerating faster than a 109 in a vertical dive, and yet it was. Later, engineers would explain the science. The Merlin-engine's two-stage supercharger delivered power in a way no one had predicted at extreme speeds. But in that moment, Chuck wasn't thinking about engineering. He was thinking about staying alive for 10 more seconds. At 1,500 feet, he pulled the stick back with both hands. The Mustang screamed in protest. The wings flexed, near braking. A black veil crept across his vision. He leveled out at 480 miles per hour, barely above the rooftops of rural Germany behind him. The ace who had been about to kill him was now overshooting, bleeding energy, drifting into a vulnerable silhouette against the dawn. Chuck reversed hard, climbing just enough to slip behind the Bf-109. The German pilot, realizing too late that he'd lost the advantage, banked desperately into a shallow turn. But the kid from West Virginia, the one flying his first mission, the one who would accidentally rewrite fighter doctrine, already had him centered in his gun sight. A 3-second burst, smoke, spiral, impact, silence, in the cockpit except for his own breath. And that was the problem. When he reported the kill back at base, no one believed him. Not the intelligence officers, not the operations commanders, not the senior pilots who'd learned doctrine from the 1920s. Manuals, they called it impossible, misidentification, stress, fog of war. Because if Chuck was right, then a 19-year-old had just proven their entire doctrine wrong, and then, days later, other pilots started reporting the same phenomenon. Asterisk, if you want to know why. This 19-year-old was flying his first mission, and accidentally started a new combat tactic, shook the entire command structure. Don't stop here. Part 2 reveals the classified tests, the internal backlash, and the officers who tried to bury the truth. The deeper files get darker. Asterisk, he'd been shot at, hunted, nearly blacked out at 500 miles per hour, but this was the first time he felt genuinely afraid. Because envelopes like that didn't circulate for rookie pilots. Those were the kind commanders passed quietly between themselves when something contradicted doctrine or threatened it. A door opened. Major Thomas Hayes, operations officer, stepped in with a stack of papers. His face was carved from stone, The kind of officer who believed the manual was law and anything outside it was heresy. 2 intelligence officers followed. Nobody smiled. Lieutenant Yerga Hayes said, dropping the papers on the table like evidence. Walk us through your engagement. Every second. Every movement. Same as before. Chuck explained the dive, the speed, the overshoot, the kill, his own surprise. But this time, the room was colder. One intel officer scribbled notes without looking up. The other stared directly at him, blinking slowly like someone measuring whether a witness was lying or simply naive. You maintain, the intel officer said, that you accelerated faster than a BF-109 in a vertical dive. Yes sir, that is mechanically impossible. Chuck didn't answer. He didn't know how to explain that sometimes survival just happened faster than logic. Hayes tapped the folder. Your gun camera footage is useless. The dive was too violent. We have no visual confirmation of your claim. Chuck straightened. With respect, sir, I wasn't trying to give you a film. I was trying not to die. A flicker of annoyance crossed Hayes' eyes. Senior officers didn't appreciate reminders that war wasn't an academic exercise. But before Hayes could escalate the pressure, the tent flap blew open, and the man who entered changed everything. The maverick who didn't believe in impossibility. Don Blakesley, commander of the 4th Fighter Group, walked in with the confidence of someone who had seen far too many pilots die following rules, written by people who'd never been shot at. His reputation was legend, relentless, brilliant, tactical predator. He scanned the room, then he scanned Chuck. You're the kid, Blakesley said, the one who supposedly outdived a Messerschmitt. Chuck's throat tightened. He wasn't sure if that was praise or preparation for an execution. Blakesley motioned for Chuck to stand. Tell me the maneuver. Chuck explained again, but this time, instead of doubt, Blakesley listened with razor-sharp interest. He asked questions the others never thought to ask. What altitude did you start the dive? What was your manifold pressure? Did you feel buffing or full control lock? Hayes finally snapped. This is nonsense, Don. The kid misread the situation. Our aircraft cannot outperform the 109 in a negative G dive. The physics are clear. Blakesley didn't blink. Physics don't care about manuals, Tom. They just exist. Then he turned to Chuck. Lieutenant, you may have stumbled onto something. The other officers stiffened. Not that word. Not something. Not from a 19-year-old, sir. Chuck asked quietly. Blakesley pointed to the sealed envelope. You're not in trouble. Your evidence, microhook, a test they never intended to run. The meeting ended abruptly. Chuck was told to report to the airfield at dawn. No explanation, no details, just an order stripped of emotion. When he walked out into the cold night air, he finally opened the envelope. Inside was a single page. High-speed performance evaluation ordered. Mustang to be tested at extreme dive profiles. Pilot not required. Do not discuss. Chuck froze. They weren't trying to understand his maneuver. They were trying to replicate it without him, because if he was right, Doctrine wasn't just flawed. Doctrine was lethal. And someone, somewhere inside command, had realized the consequences. If a 19-year-old could accidentally start a new combat tactic, it meant the officers in charge had missed it for years. Asterisk dawn rolled across the English airfield in a pale band of light, barely strong enough to cut through the frozen fog. Chuck arrived exactly at 0600, breath visible in the cold, boots crunching across frost-hardened ground. But instead of finding a mechanic crew prepping his Mustang, he found a completely different sight. 3 aircraft stood lined up on the runway, all P-51B Mustangs, all with unusual markings taped over their tail codes. Not his plane, not anyone's plane. Test birds, 2 officers he didn't know stood beside them, clipboards in hand. And then he saw him, Colonel Blakesley, hands behind his back, watching the horizon like he was waiting for the sun to grant permission to break the rules. Lieutenant, Blakesley said without turning, you're observing today, not flying. It wasn't a request. It wasn't punishment either. It was control. Control of information. Chuck swallowed. Sir, am I being replaced in the evaluation? Blakesley finally looked at him. You're too valuable to risk, and too inexperienced to be believed. The words hit like a cold slap. Too inexperienced to be believed. He wanted to protest, but Blakesley's tone wasn't mocking or cruel. It was painfully pragmatic, the voice of a man who understood that military truth wasn't determined by reality, it was determined by rank. A test pilot approached. Captain Harold Dempsey, a man Chuck had only heard about in rumors, calm under pressure, cold in the cockpit, known for pushing aircraft until they either screamed or buckled. Brief me, Dempsey said. Blakesley nodded at Chuck. Tell him exactly what you did, and for the 3rd time in as many days. Chuck explained the impossible dive, the inverted roll, the near vertical descent, the acceleration he shouldn't have had, the overshoot he shouldn't have achieved. Dempsey didn't react, didn't blink. When Chuck finished, he simply said, "Understood." He climbed into the Mustang. The engine started with a metallic snarl, a deeper growl than Chuck was used to. Testing engines were tuned differently, more power, less forgiveness. The aircraft taxied down the runway, fog parting around its wings, like ghostly curtains. Blakesley and the officers watched in silence at 15,000 feet. The test began. Dempsey rolled inverted dot and dove. Chuck watched the altimeter, readings transmitted through the wired telemetry station. At first, everything matched the manuals. Acceleration steady, drag increasing, expected stability loss. Then just past 420 miles per hour, something changed. The Mustang surged, exactly as Chuck described. A sudden efficiency curve, a drop in boundary layer drag, the Merlin-engine screaming in a pitch that was never documented. One officer whispered, "That's not possible." Blakesley didn't move. "It's happening." The telemetry needle shot past 450 miles per hour, then 470, then 490. At 500 miles per hour, the stabilizers began buffing, but Dempsey held it. The aircraft finally pulled out at a brutal 6.5 gigaseconds. So violent Chuck felt it in his own spine from the ground. The Mustang leveled off. The German Bf-109 couldn't have matched that dive. Chuck hadn't been lucky. He'd been correct. For a moment, silence ruled the airfield. Then the second test began. After 3 test flights, all confirming Chuck's experience, the officers gathered around Blakesley. Their faces held a mix of shock, pride, and fear, because this evidence proved something devastating. The old doctrine had been killing pilots for months, maybe years. The oldest officer broke the silence. "If this gets out, tactical school will be gutted. Command structure undermined, training rewritten. This changes everything." Blakesley's jaw tightened. "That's why we have to get it right." Another officer pointed directly at Chuck. "And what about him?" Chuck felt the air thicken. "He's not trained for analysis," the officer said. "Not qualified for doctrine review. His report shouldn't be used officially." Blakesley didn't blink. "Without him, you wouldn't have tests to analyze." "That's exactly the issue," the officer snapped. "If we publish this as a result triggered by an inexperienced pilot, the political cost will be enormous. Surgeon-level doctrine overturned by an impossible, unacceptable." Chuck felt the ground tilt beneath him. They wanted his discovery, but they didn't want him. Blakesley stepped forward, voice low, threatening. "History doesn't care who finds the truth. It only cares who survives it," the officer replied. "And command cares about neither." The reassignment order felt heavier than the envelope itself. Chuck read it twice, 3 times. Each word cut deeper than any burst of enemy fire ever could. He'd survived impossible odds in the sky, and now the threat came from behind a desk. Lieutenant Colonel Blakesley's voice snapped him out of it. Chuck snapped to attention instinctively. "Follow me." They walked across the airfield toward a small operations building that looked like it was built from equal parts wood, sandbags, and exhaustion. Inside, the sound of typewriters hammered the walls like distant artillery. The tension was even sharper. Blakesley shut the door to his office. "Sit." Chuck sat. Blakesley leaned on the desk, arms folded, jaw set, like he was preparing to shoot down a squadron of arguments. "There are 2 wars happening right now. One up there," he pointed toward the ceiling, "and one in here." He tapped the desk. Chuck frowned. "Sir, I'm not trying to cause trouble. You didn't. The truth did." Blakesley pulled out Chuck's test files and laid them down like pieces of forbidden scripture. "The test results match your experience exactly. You proved something we should have known months ago, and that scares them the men who built Doctrine, the men whose reputations depend on being right, the ones who signed tactical manuals that got pilots killed." Chuck felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't supposed to be political. Blakesley laughed once, humorless. "Son, everything in war is political, even survival." Later that afternoon, Blakesley brought Chuck to a command meeting. It wasn't a request. It was strategic. If they were going to dismiss Chuck, they were going to have to do it to his face. The room was packed. Colonels, intelligence chiefs, operations officers, tactical analysts. Maps covered the walls. Cigarette smoke hung in thick layers. Everyone spoke in low tones until Blakesley dragged a chair into the center of the room and nodded at Chuck to sit. Conversations died. Instantly. General officers didn't like witnesses. Colonel Hubert Zena, commander of the 56th Fighter Group, stepped forward. He was old guard, textbook disciple, formation zealot, a man who believed tactics were sacred because he had memorized them, not because they worked. He addressed the room. Not Chuck. The so-called acceleration anomaly is a misinterpretation, statistical outlier, stress-induced perception error. The Mustang cannot outperform the Messerschmitt in a negative G-dive. Another colonel chimed in, and the reports from other pilots. Coincidence? Collective exaggeration. Blakesley stepped forward. You saw the test data. Xena ignored him. What concerns me is this. He tapped Chuck's file. A 19-year-old with barely 300 flight hours claims to have stumbled onto a tactic that contradicts 16 years of established doctrine. Chuck clenched his fists. Xena finished with the line that revealed the entire truth. If we validate this maneuver, we admit our manuals were wrong, our training was inadequate, and our command decisions cost lives. Silence spread across the room. There it was, the motive, not safety, not clarity, not truth. Self-preservation. Blakesley fired back. Doctrine isn't scripture, Hubert. It's supposed to evolve. Your ego doesn't outrank physics. Xena's face darkened. This pilot will not be used as a wedge to undermine the command structure. Then he pointed at Chuck. Effective immediately. Lieutenant Yerger is removed from active flight rotation pending reassignment. Chuck felt the room tilt. The words landed like an aircraft wing snapping in mid-flight. General William Kepner entered like a storm. A man whose mere presence forced conversations to halt. World War I combat veteran, known for challenging stale thinking, terrifying to bureaucrats. What's this about removing pilots from rotation? Xena straightened, suddenly cautious. Sir, this is a doctrinal issue. No, Kepner snapped. This is a survival issue. He walked over to Chuck. You're the one who outdived the 100. Chuck nodded. Yes, sir. Kepner turned to the officers. Then he's the one who stays in the air. If the Mustang can do what he says, then every pilot needs to learn it, immediately. Xena protested. Sir, we can't rewrite doctrine based on one engagement. We can rewrite it based on truth, Kepner said. And that boy survived a scenario every manual says is unsurvivable. Manuals don't win wars. Pilots do. The room went silent. Xena looked like the air had been stolen from his lungs. Kepner delivered the final blow. Lieutenant Yerger remains operational. Effective now. The days following Kepner's intervention felt like a silent standoff. Chuck returned to regular flight duties, but the airfield itself had changed. Pilots whispered. Officers watched him with a mix of suspicion and reluctant respect. Mechanics gave him cautious nods, knowing rumors travel faster than aircraft. Chuck pretended not to notice, but he felt it, the weight of being both a symbol and a threat. Blakesley approached him on the tarmac as ground crew fueled glamorous Glenn Yerger. He said, Command is split. Half want your tactic taught immediately. Half want the whole incident buried. Chuck swallowed. What do you want, sir? Blakesley smirked. To win. He handed Chuck a small folder, unofficial, unmarked. Inside was a simple instruction sheet, individual energy escape and reversal draft. A written description of the maneuver he had improvised. Chuck looked up. You wrote this? Partially, Blakesley said. But the origin point is you. But the other officers, don't worry about them. Worry about the Luftwaffe. He pointed to the sheet. You're teaching this, informally, off the books tonight. Chuck blinked. Me. Blakesley leaned in. You're the only pilot who's survived the maneuver under real fire. They need to learn from someone who lived it, not someone who read it. And that's how it began, in a dimly lit hangar. Late at night, with 8 pilots gathered around Chuck as he drew diagrams on a chalkboard, normally used for maintenance updates. Chuck's voice was steady but low. You won't find this in the manual, he began. But it works, and it will keep you alive. The key isn't the dive itself, it's the timing. He sketched the German 109 silhouette. They expect you to stay predictable. That's why the dive works. They won't anticipate it. He paused. But the dive alone isn't the tactic. The tactic is the reversal. You don't dive to escape. You dive to force the overshoot. One pilot frowned. But we've been told. Chuck cut him off. I know what you've been told. And I know what I did. And I know what the data confirmed. The Mustang gains acceleration at high-speed profiles the Germans don't expect. He walked them through the angle, the commitment, the blackout risk, the pullout, then the final strike. By the end, the room had fallen silent. One pilot murmured, "This changes everything."